Some more breaking news to report this Friday night, this time on the health of President Biden, who received a physical exam today, his first since taking office as the oldest first-term president in history. I want to talk about the results with Chief Medical Correspondent Dr. Sanjay Gupta, who's also author of the fascinating new book, World War C, Lessons from COVID-19 Pandemic and How to Prepare for the Next One. So Sanjay, what can you tell us about the results of this physical?
Well, we had some idea of some of the president's past medical history. We also know that he's the oldest first-term president. So putting those two things together, there were specific things that I think they were sort of targeting. We know that he has this history of reflux, for example. We know that he has a history of atrial fibrillation. They were focused on the fact that his gait, his walking, Anderson, seems to have changed a bit. They described it as being less fluid, stiffer gait. We also know he takes this medication for his cholesterol, and he had a colonoscopy. So those are sort of the major things that came out of that. And there were a few findings. His reflux is still persistent, which is why they think he's been coughing a lot. You may hear him clearing his throat a lot during speeches. That seems to be the cause of that. As far as his gait being changed, they think he's developed some arthritis in his lower back. But the other big things, his atrial fibrillation appears stable. He has a history of having his brain surgery, having aneurysms operated back in the late 80s. That appears to have not changed. And then again, this colonoscopy for which he was sedated, had a colonoscopy and also had an endoscopy as well. So those are the major things that they sort of put into the report, Anderson.
Obviously, there's been a lot of focus on his cognitive abilities, questions raised by opponents and others. In 2018, the former president had a test that measured mental acuity. Was that part of today's test?
It doesn't seem like it. I read pretty carefully through the doctor's report, and they mentioned neurological exam, but that was more in terms of testing motor strength and sensation and things like that. President Trump had something known as the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. It's sort of a screening test for dementia. And, there was no mention of that sort of thing here. It is a constant point of discussion, I can tell you, within the geriatrics community. I wrote this book last year about brain health, and one of the things that kept coming up was, should sort of these types of screening tests, cognitive screening tests, be more commonly done? And there's many in that community who believe starting at age 65, there should be some sort of screening that's done. Dr. Ronald Peterson, who runs the Alzheimer's clinic at Mayo, has been somebody who's talked about that. But as far as we know, for President Biden, we didn't see any kind of test like that performed.
We should also point out that the president's physical made history today. He temporarily turned over presidential authority to Vice President Harris, which is the first time in American history that a woman had the power of the president. So an interesting day in history. I want to turn to the fight against COVID, though. Today, the CDC, FDA endorsed booster vaccines for all Americans 18 years and older. What does that tell us about where we are in this fight?
Well, I think it tells us a bit about what the vaccines are doing, and they seem to be very protective still, but waning a bit in terms of that protectiveness. It could be because of time, like how much time has passed between since people have gotten their shots. It could just be because of this Delta variant. But as we go into the winter and cooler and drier months, people are concerned about the contagiousness of this virus growing even, and might that have a greater impact. What is interesting, Anderson, is that if you look at where things stand now, most adults were already eligible for boosters, either because of age or because of pre-existing health conditions. Close to 90% of adults were already eligible, but it was confusing. A lot of people didn't know they were eligible. I think what today's announcement has done is sort of streamlined that and basically said everybody who's an adult is eligible for the booster. They took it a step further even and said if you're over the age of 50, you should get a booster. So, that's sort of where we are. But I want to show you what I think are interesting graphs that tell the story. In the United States, if you look at people who get hospitalized for COVID, they are still, the vast majority of them are, that's the red line, they're unvaccinated. The green line at the bottom up until the end of September, relatively flat, but it started to tick up. If you look at Israeli data sort of over the fall, going up to November 1st, a really, I think, important picture emerged here, Anderson. So unvaccinated on the left, they are still the vast majority of people who end up with severe COVID. But there was people who had received 2 doses of the vaccine that were increasingly developing severe symptoms. But if they got boosted, you can see the benefit there.